It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are discussing Slow River by Nicola Griffith. This is a retro episode, but this book doesn't feel all that retro in a lot of ways.
It doesn't, which, is pretty impressive given that, it's not exactly a young book. It's from 1995.
Yeah, no, I kept having to go back and check. Was this really written in the mid-90s? Because she got a lot of stuff right about the future. And the stuff that, is not quote-unquote right is still very plausible. And so, first and foremost, like, goddamn, this feels very contemporary. It's also very literary.
As it, like, one of the things about Nicola Griffith is that she writes stuff that is solidly rooted in science fiction. This book won the Nebula, I believe, but is also just has like a real literary feel to it. And I think that's true of basically all of her books.
Yeah, I would agree. So would you like to take a stab at the plot, or shall I?
I will try. So this is a novel told in 3 different periods in one young woman's life. Lore, or Frances Lorien Van de West, is a billionaire heiress from a billionaire biotech heiress who is kidnapped and left naked and bleeding on the street, falls in with a woman who is bad news, and realizes that. So on one track, she falls in with a woman who's bad news. In another track, as a child, she slowly realizes that there's something very wrong with her family. And the third track, the latest temporally, has left the bad news woman and is doing her best to hold down a steady job and sort of lead a wage slave life as working at a biotech factory that she could run.
She's working in a water reclamation plant.
That uses her family's proprietary
biotech, little nano bugs, bacteria, basically. So this is a world in which biotech has advanced to a point where that it hasn't in our world. Although plausibly it could with our current technology.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're actually increasingly seeing the use. We're seeing promising studies using engineered bacteria to break down pollution. And that's mostly what these engineered bacteria are doing, is breaking down pollution and doing water reclamation and soil reclamation and things like that.
Yeah. It's this is a near future sci-fi book set in London. A lot of the things, as I said, about the near future, it gets very right. But one of the characteristically 90s things it gets wrong is that there might be like institutional investment in new infrastructure. So we could potentially have something like this right now, but we do not.
I mean, she does not, I believe, give any dates, so it's possible that this novel is happening 20 years in the future when, that's finally happening.
Indeed. But there are people alive who remember like the 60s and 70s, I think. So it can't be that far in the future.
That's true.
So, I have nothing to add to that besides that little note about the setting. And are there lesbians in this book?
Yes. I mean, Laura is very much a lesbian.
Yes. And it should be pointed out that this is also a society where we've gotten over homophobia, as far as I can tell, even in a working class setting.
Yeah.
Which was very, very optimistic in 1995, but actually doesn't seem that weird.
Right.
To a contemporary reader. Yes, are there wizards?
I would argue that her mother and Greta are both have a lot in common with our standard wizard figure.
Not to mention her grandmother, who made all of their hair gray as a conspicuous gene consumption thing.
Right.
Which, is again, time doesn't quite work right, but you know what we're talking about. So yeah, close enough, I would say. Nicola Griffith is certainly like a foundational, I think, artist in the Wizards versus Lesbians SF track, and it's weird that I don't hear more about her. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, especially so. This was her second novel. Her first novel, Ammonite, is possibly even more sort of proto Wizles, and we will read that one at some point soon as well. But so it is really actually strange. I mean, these books won the Nebula. They've also won Lambda Awards, and yet possibly because she's fairly literary.
Yeah, there's a certain like neither fish nor fowl thing going on here.
But honestly, I'm going to soapbox for a second here. One of the things I've noticed is that we just do not actually pay attention to our science fiction lesbian forebears, speculative fiction lesbian forebears. Like, you don't actually hear people talking about Gail Baudino, or you basically hear people talk about Rust, and that's it. And Marion Zimmer Bradley, sort of, except that now nobody wants to talk about Marion Zimmer Bradley.
Yes.
For good reason. But
I felt maybe a little bit of an editorial comment about Marion Zimmer Bradley in here, but that's neither here nor there.
No, they're oh yeah. Well, we can get into that post spoiler zone. But yeah, I mean, part of why we don't talk about her more is that people just aren't interested. The people who are reading queer science fiction today don't seem to really be talking about the queer science fiction of yesteryear. And I don't know if it's that they didn't read it, or what, but like it's really sort of, I think it's unfortunate because you guys are missing out on some, as you've been able to tell from the previous episodes of this retro episodes of this podcast, you guys are missing out on some stuff that's either very good or really interestingly weird.
I imagine that this is connected to the larger problem of like the queer generation gap.
Yeah.
And it's, the causes of that we are all too aware of. But
yeah.
But it's also just sort of a boomer, non-boomer thing across the culture, is that some of these bridges are quite difficult to cross. But regardless, if we do any public service, I hope it's to, point people toward the work that was being done in this field, particularly by someone as obviously brilliant as Nicola Griffith.
Right. Even like Fire Logic, which is from the aughts, the Elemental Logic series and Nicola Griffith's work. And, people should be reading this stuff. These should be the same kinds of classics that people talk about when they are also talking about other, I think, less good works from like the 80s and 90s. And early aughts.
Agreed. So that's one reason why you should read this book.
Yes, to know your history. Also, it's really quite good. It deals with it deals with a laundry list of content warning things that we'll be getting into the content warnings. So it deals with a lot of issues around rape and child abuse and sexual exploitation in, I think, a fairly nuanced and interesting way. And
in a way where it feels like we've backslid since here.
Yes.
Like many of the novels that have came out in the last few years that we've read for this do not do as good a job,
right,
with those themes as this book does.
Right. And I will note, I don't know if you had the audiobook or if you read an ebook or physical book, but the physical book has an author's note at the end, which says, Did your book have that?
This audiobook came without any like published by or this is the product of Random House or whatever, which makes me think it was a homebrew project. And it did contain the author's note. See?
Well, that's good, because the author's note is great. The author's note explicitly tells you that everybody tends to say that that any woman who writes about abuse must be speaking from her own experience, and so then she says, "Let me be explicit. Slow River is fiction, not autobiography. I made it up."
Yes. So that definitely that. It's also just like it's nice to read a novel that is thoughtfully structured, like you mentioned, with the 3-part structure of the book that goes through these three different periods in her life.
Right.
And
You
that
know,
really mirrors a bunch of different themes, on a number of different levels across the, sometimes she hammers that a bit hard, but can you blame her?
right.
And,
And
like,
if you read the fifth season, which does the same thing, and um, and so if you liked that in the fifth season, that's another reason you should read this book.
but yeah, this is a grown-up novel with themes, and it's well written by a
Right.
person with a poetic touch, and
Yes.
and there's nothing hugely offensive about it, and the characters are well drawn, I mean, it's a little well, to get
It's
into
quite
maybe
yeah.
why you
Why
shouldn't
you
read the
should
book.
read is it's quite harrowing in places.
Yeah, no, this is it's a lot of rough stuff here, which we will again get into when we talk about content warnings. But and but it's not. It doesn't feel like overwhelmingly miserable. It's
Yeah.
like the people who are living, these lives, these hard lives, are not devoid of joy. They do little things to make their lot better. They go to parties. She tends her garden. Like
Yes.
they're. It's not like this isn't misery porn.
Yeah.
In a way that some of the other stuff that we've read is. But it's also a lot of hard stuff is happening.
Yeah.
If I were to say, this book is despite the fact that we were just saying it's neither fish nor fowl, if I was going to say this book is any kind of science fiction, it's hard science fiction. A lot
yeah.
of time is spent talking about bacteria and what they eat and what they excrete and what levels are good or bad for you and what the temperature does to it, and like very very detailed and plausible discussions of sewage treatment.
Yes, and it also has in common with like classic hard science fiction of you get your competence porn moments where somebody is just like, yes, I know what I'm doing. I can say all the sciencey words.
Yep. And that dragged for me a little bit. I think that
Honestly,
there's a
I
reason why
enjoyed it,
we've sort of
but-
moved away from that a little bit in SF, but that's the only real complaint that I have about or that's the only reason why I might think that a person might want to steer clear of this book. It's besides the content warnings.
The content warnings.
Yeah.
Because, who boy are there a lot. I mean, so
Rape,
we have
child abuse, grooming, abusive relationships, badly abusive relationships,
sexual exploitation.
people trafficking, basically.
Right.
Prostitution
Human
under
trafficking.
duress, drug use, prostitution, sort of like, basically prostitution with drug use and
non-consensual
which was a very
drugging.
popular topic in the 90s.
Yeah.
And
Kidnapping, torture,
yes.
suicide.
Yep. And horrible family dynamics.
Horrible family dynamics.
Yeah, and it's also a book where the main character does a lot of awful things.
Yes.
Which, you may or may not forgive her for, but you don't have to choose because it's art. This isn't
Right.
didactic.
Right. You're not expected to forgive her for this. She does, and she's not sure whether or not she should be forgiven for this. And the narrative is very much like, make up your own mind. But like the narrative really pushes back against the idea that that she is a passive victim and that the bad things that she did were because she was a victim.
Indeed. So, that being said, is anything that we need to talk about before we get into the spoiler zone?
No, we should get into the spoiler zone. We've taken our
God.
time.
It's been 15 minutes. All right.
Sorry.
Into the spoiler zone. Spoiler zone. It's important to me to note that Laura still misses her childhood, despite everything. The old home is powerful, regardless of what happened inside it. So things that I appreciate about this book, compared to stuff that we've read recently. Number one, queerness doesn't excuse anything.
It really doesn't. Everybody.
No.
The thing is, one of the things, and maybe we should have said, why should you read this book? Is that almost all of the major characters in this book are women, which also means that most of the atrocities being committed are being committed by women. The thing is, it wouldn't have to mean that, but it really does. Like, she's, queer people are just as flawed and awful as, if not more so, than the straight people around them.
Yes. It's like all of the human failings that the straight people might have to deal with, plus the additional trauma
Yep.
of having to deal with being queer. They're mostly off screen, I should mention, in this book, but still.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, it's very nice to see, like, oh, Spanner is immediately taking sexual advantage of this completely vulnerable and helpless person in her care.
This, naked 18-year-old that she has rescued off the street and provided medical care for. And, before the science fiction skin grafts have had a chance to even set in, she's already, taking sexual advantage of Lore.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm not sure. I'm not
Spanners
sure.
Spanners are bad news woman.
Yes, she has the great cyberpunk name of Spanner.
Yes.
She's probably bipolar, or on coke, or both.
Spanner has a lot of issues. It's she's not so classy that you can be like, this is an obvious case of something, but she's definitely got a lot of issues.
Yes, whether chemically induced or otherwise, she has manic fits, and also, actually, it's really well observed manic fits, which are like big bursts of generosity, and then you pay for it forever, kind of things. God, Spanner's terrifying, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean,
if you've ever met somebody like her. It's drawing a curtain over that one, honestly. That's part of the reason why it was like, when's the last time you read this?
I trust me. I remembered Spanner. I warned you that this book was a bit heavy. In fact, I believe I said, that I was scheduling this one before Ammonite, even though this one's more harrowing, and just because I think it's also more interesting.
Yeah, I was excited to get into it because I knew that Nicola Griffith could write, and then I lost somehow in that excitement that this was going to be harrowing, and I got harrowed. But yeah, no, I really appreciated how merciless the narrator is about Spanner, and how, like, the fact that these are two women in this situation does absolutely nothing to ameliorate how horrific it is.
Like the entire time. And, their relationship, it's actually, one of the things that I think she does really deftly, which I was really impressed by, is that all the scenes when she's in her, when she's living with Spanner, are very much inside Lore's head. Like, the narrative voice, it's not first person, but it's inside Lore's head. And yet, you can still really tell that this is Lore's viewpoint. This is not the narrative viewpoint. And so even as Lore is still very much in denial about how awful Spanner is, it's just very clear. And she does a really good job of making everything really, and this is true for all of the scenes, really. She just does such a good job of making it really clear what's going on without while still leaving you feeling very inside Lore's perspective.
Right, exactly. It's Lore's frozen reaction to things. Lore isn't appalled by it in the moment.
Right, but you can understand. Right, you get to see how awful it is, and you get to understand why she's not, appalled by it in the moment.
And another thing, like, is that it really reflects how even, even after everything, even after Laura sort of has enough of herself back to realize what Spanner has done to her, Laura still loves Spanner at the end of it. Like,
Right,
as,
she's still trying to like save her, and
yeah, I
three
mean,
months
she's,
after that, she's 3 months after she's realized that Spanner has been
Spanner
has
essentially turned her out,
right. I mean,
and
Spanner. Yeah, I mean, Spanner basically used the drug that she was addicted to force both herself and Laura into prostitution.
mhm,
And when when Laura finally says, "No, I don't want to do this anymore. We have other options. How are we making this much money and still like short on money?" And realizing that Spanner has chosen this particular life,
mhm,
like she's able to leave, which good for her. But
yeah,
you know, you get to see, and this is actually where I think the 3-part structure works really well, because like you can see from the beginning that Spanner is bad news, because the first thing Spanner does is say, well, what are you going to give me if I help you?
yeah,
And then the second thing you see her do is start groping this young woman,
naked teenager, yeah,
this naked teenager. And but you don't get to see, but because this is happening as you're reading, you're also seeing 3 months after Spanner, 3 months after she's left Spanner. And so you can see, oh well, this was a bad relationship, but you can kind of see why she still has this complicated thing. And then you watch her relationship with Spanner get worse and worse and worse, well, still seeing her in the present, still interacting with this woman, and like still hung
exactly.
up on this woman.
It's really good.
It's
It's
really good. The structure of this book is really well done.
Yeah, I wanted to like. So as I was saying before the spoiler zone, like this is a novel with themes, and
Yes.
the structure sort of matches the themes. Like, we can say that you know one of the big things that Laura struggles with is dissociation and maintaining her sense of self.
Yeah.
And that we get things where like she's imagining a reflection of herself, or trying to envision what she looks like and seeing three different people.
Right.
And so the book is giving us three different narratives about basically three distinct persons,
Yes.
because
Well, and yet it's still really obvious that these are all the same lore.
yeah, no, the book isn't pretending that they're like literally different people or that
Right.
her entire personality has changed,
Right.
but
And but it's great because I feel like part of what works really well with the structure is that Laura clearly sees herself as three different people. She sees these two moments. She sees the kidnapping and then
and
the
then leaving
breakup with
Spanner.
Spanner as
Yeah.
like these two formative moments that have like made her a new person. But she's so obviously the same person in all three of the narratives, where you're getting to see her at like all these different ages.
Yeah, no, that is a
Like
really good
like
point.
this,
It's like,
you get this mix of arrogance and like desperation to please and freeze reactions.
yeah, no, and like, it's the fact that she views herself so much as like the product of her circumstance, because she can't sit in her body enough to like pull a sense of self from her body,
Yeah.
which is sort of it's made explicit later on that, like but she keeps talking. It's like she is willfully ignoring that this is all connected, because in the same way that when she's talking about like the different layers of the jungle canopy, and she's imagining how all of these layers like aren't aware of each other and have nothing to do with each other, which is not how biospheres work, as the author clearly knows, because the author's a biologist, or for the sake of this story has put on a biologist's hat,
Right.
and she should know because she's a microbiologist.
Right. Like
you know
actually, this is an integrated ecosystem, guys.
right, exactly. So it's like, no, in fact, your father's great sin is that he's pretending that he can float above all of this.
Yes. And
and
specifically, and that was so, I liked the way that she's still, where, her real moment of maturity, I think, is near the end. That I thought was very convincing is her realization that even as she's trying to forgive her father, there's so many things that he should have known about, from, the fact that her mother was molesting her sisters to the fact that their company is committing all sorts of atrocities.
Yes.
And that, that his desire to be the sweet guy who doesn't really involve himself in the company and, appreciates endangered fish, does not actually absolve him of, the crimes which he has enabled.
Yes, but she still loves him because they had like a functional father-daughter relationship, and
they didn't really. So that's the thing. She desperately wants. It's now that it's as soon as she loses. So there's this thing you get to see when she's a kid, where at first, her parents are competing for her love, and you watch her mother win. She enjoys time with her father. She's sad that she's making her father sad, but like her mother is the one that she desperately wants to impress and please. To the point. I wouldn't
know anything about any of this.
Right, exactly. And again, to the point that when, her brother tells her that his twin sister, who just committed suicide, was being molested, she, even though it's so obvious from the outside, as the person that she tells this story to, and like within 10 minutes is like, that doesn't make sense for it to be your father. Are you sure? It must be your mother.
Right.
Like, and it's super obvious to the reader as well. But she can't accept it, and so she assumes it must be her father. Because, her mother is the parent that she's, like, bonded to. And then because she has this need to, like, attach herself to people and please people. And as soon as she loses, metaphorically loses her mother by being forced to accept that actually her mother is the child rapist, suddenly she's felt with this, like, longing to reconnect with her father, as if they'd had this idyllic relationship.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. When in fact it was, like, his lack of, his thinking that he could just sort of move on and do his own thing, that it was active negligence, put it that way.
Yeah.
I should mention that I didn't know it was the mother until it was pointed out to me, and part of that is just because I was willing to accept the what it would have been in almost any other book, but also the the audiobook narrator did a sort of a clever thing where she put a little bit of extra stank on Laura's father pulling up his pajama bottoms during the scene, and I was like, oh, did you just give that away? And no, in fact, foxed me.
That's really interesting because, reading the book as a reader, I went, why is her mother the one in the room? And why is her mother's daughter, why is her half-sister, who's her mother's adult daughter, being so insistent that, yes, she get a good lock on her door, a lock that absolutely no one can pick?
Yeah, no, that's, it's really obvious in retrospect, but I was willing to ride the received narrative until
and part of the point of this book is that actually women can be rapists too.
Yes, which we all know at this point, or should.
I don't think we. I don't think we do all know it. We should all know it, but that's one of these things that actually makes this book. That's one of the things that honestly makes this book feel current. Is that it's an argument that still kind of needs to be made. Is that actually women can be rapists. Actually, queer women can be rapists.
Diversity win. Yeah.
And it really, I think this is the sort of book that then or now it really helps that it was written by somebody who is an out lesbian.
Yes.
Because
very much so. And written by an out lesbian who has many qualities as an author, but perhaps one of the major ones is that she will absolutely not abide bullshit.
Yes. Yes, I think that's kind of a running theme in her books. We should cover So Lucky at some point.
Oh man, I don't want to reread that, but
But it's so
not that it was
fast.
bad. It was just very, very hard to get through. So Lucky is a novel about having multiple sclerosis. It's more of a straight piece of fiction, and it's hard to read, but it's good. But yeah, no. And speaking of themes, not in addition to the sort of like tiered abuse and like rich family, poor people, is there a connection, and it's like, where's your responsibility, where's your due diligence? There's also purity and pollution and remediation.
Yes.
Goes from like the whole science fiction side of it is about designing bugs to clean up spills and occasionally creating thalidomide babies when you're not when you don't do it right. But also like part of the reason that Laura feels like there's been this enormous break in her in herself between part 1, part 2, and part 3 is that her body has been soiled in one way or another. Like her nakedness and her like desperation have been shown to the world.
But it's not just that. It's also that she feels like she has done things to soil herself.
Yes.
She thinks she doesn't know, and the narrative actually doesn't actually give us an answer. She thinks that has killed a man to escape her kidnappers,
Right.
and she does not see herself as the narrative makes it very clear that she is a victim of what Spanner is doing, but she does not see herself as one, possibly
Yes.
because she doesn't want to let herself be a victim.
Yeah.
But as a result, this means that she really leans into the ways in which she did enable Spanner's bad behavior.
We should mention that, like,
And by Spanner's bad behavior, I mean like mass drugging of basically sex, pollen, the drug, and then filming and non-consensually filming a bunch of their friends, and then editing, putting on new heads, and then selling all those films as pornography.
Spanner is a real, like, you have to be willfully blind not to see that Spanner is this horrific, manipulative, amoral scumbag. But also, like, Laura has been brought up to take all of the responsibility for her own behavior on herself,
Right.
which is, I guess, part of what you were saying is, like, wasn't actually parented at any point. Like, this is a person who was put in charge of a public works project with permanent infrastructure
At the age of 17.
at the age of 17, which is, I mean, insane, first of all. But like, this is a person who has erected waterfalls in Kyrgyzstan
Right.
that will stand for X number of years as a 17-year-old, and therefore thinks that she should be entirely responsible for everything, that can't see herself as the victim of Spanner or of her parents or of the list goes on. It has to all be her,
Right.
and so she has to be but her path through it is to literally immerse herself in shit.
Yes.
It's like, we're as polluted as we can be, but it turns out that process leads to clean water if people actually pay attention and fund the thing properly.
Right. And and sort of metaphorically as well, it's really interesting that it is in fact the time when she is when she's attempting to work a blue collar job, that it's not fun at any point, but this is definitely the most pleasant segments to read.
Yes. Her waiting around in actual sewage is like, she's having a pretty good time.
Right. She's like making actual friends.
She's making friends, she's talking to people, she's helping people, like, in a legitimate way,
and she's got a
She
slave
saved
burn
somebody's
room.
life.
She saves somebody's life. I mean, she like saves the entire city.
Yeah.
But also she and she mentors somebody. And and she has like a slow burn romance going on with her supervisor.
True. Can I just want to say again, I know I keep saying this, but the fact that you could, if this book came out this year, you could accuse it of being like ripped from the headline stuff with like COVID vaccine patents and deep fakes.
Right.
It's astoundingly precedent.
And honestly, it reads as a better critique of billionaires now than it did in the 90s.
Yes. Exactly. 100%.
Like, she managed to perfectly project what, the billionaires of the future were going to be like. And they're awful. No. They're
sure enough, they're horrific.
They're horrific. And I mean, some of this, unfortunately, is the timelessness of these themes.
Yes.
But
sadly,
also,
there aren't as many women among them as she projects, but,
Right. I guess that's the difference. But yeah, you could very much read this book as like a commentary on our times.
I absolutely adore the detail of her as like a 12-year-old making deep fake porn of her own parents fucking because they're, not getting along in real life.
I know.
That's such I don't know where you have to take your brain to come up with that, but it's so perfectly something a 12-year-old with access to a precocious 12-year-old with access to that kind of technology would do. Mm-hmm. Like, kudos.
Right. I mean, that honestly, that's the one thing. I'm not sure this. I hate to be like, I don't, this sort of thing couldn't be published today, but she would get so much hate for that, for having a preteen and teen who, like feels sexual desire and is horny, and does weird dysfunctional things about it because she is an isolated teenager with tons of resources and very little emotional support.
Yes, I mean, this is true to life. It was true to
right.
life then, and
it's true
and
to
by
life.
God, with the internet, it's more true to life now, I'm sure,
Right, no, it's just, I think we're currently in an era where there's a lot of pushback about, writing about the idea that teenagers might want to have sex, particularly in queer literature right now. I mean, think about the attempt to hate mob Tamsin Muir for writing fan fiction about teenagers.
Well, yes, it didn't work, but yes.
Well, yes, that's because Tamsin Muir came out of survived way worse on the internet before making it big.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're right. I don't think that it would have bothered Nicola either, but you're right.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see here. Do you have any? I've been bringing stuff up to talk about. Do you have any other? Because I do have a few minor gripes that I want to get into.
So I do want to talk about the way that you said that this felt like sort of a pushback against Marion Zimmer Bradley, and I was wondering. I mean, the whole thing with the mother definitely feels like one to me, but I was wondering if there's other things in there that you felt like could be references.
I mean, I think that like there's a big flashing point is made, and maybe I'm sort of thinking about the era in which the book came out too, but about how villainous women can be. Mm-hmm. About but not just like how villainous women can be, but how like the position makes the person more than the gender.
Right. That it's like, about power and lack of accountability.
Yeah, it's like we have Magyar and her boss, and Magyar's the good boss and the other guy's the bad boss, but it's like, power does things to people. Magyar is kind of an asshole because she's the boss, and...
Right.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what does that say about God? Incidentally, we're doing Nona next week.
Well, and also because she's just part of this toxic work culture. You can see her becoming less of an asshole.
Yeah, as things go on, but it's like... yeah, it doesn't matter the gender of the person who's telling you to ignore the safety regulations, and and pegging your pay to productivity in a thing where safety is far more important than productivity. Not again that I would know anything about any of this. um, yeah, but like half of the but yeah, no, I think that's certainly part of it. But also just absolutely not letting any kind of like grooming or child abuse off, and really, and not just like saying this is bad, just demonstrating the effect that it has on the people who underwent it.
Right.
Like and not just one effect either. The one girl who becomes a huge like party girl, like daring and herself and in danger, and then when she starts working on it, when she confronts it, that's when it becomes too much and she dies.
Yeah.
That's like A, super real, B, just hard to deal with. And then, the person who just clams up and does everything to make her and her family safe because she never feels safe.
Right. To the point of being willing to, murder her younger half-sister who she has previously tried to protect.
Yeah, no, I would be interested to have, I would have liked to have sat down with Greta at some point and talked to her adult to adult in this book. That would have been interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the things in the book that, is a little bit of a missed opportunity is that because it is so rooted in Lore's perspective, and Lore, like everybody else, dismisses Greta, we don't get to see more of Greta. We barely see her, and she's one of the most interesting and complicated characters in the book.
Yeah, we only have like her works to judge her by, basically.
Right, which are, mostly pretty awful, but there is, as Laura's grappling with, there's this moment where she is the only person who does anything to protect Laura from their mother.
Yep. Agreed. And I think it's entirely possible that if Laura hadn't cried out and, attempted to resist this in the first place, not that she knew what was happening, but Greta probably wouldn't have done anything, So,
right. But as soon as
Greta, it becomes a potential disruptive element to the family.
Yeah, but I honestly don't think it's just that, because she could have done exactly what their mother did, which is say, oh, it was just a bad dream, and she continues to have nightmares. She has nightmares throughout the book, and it could have easily been explained away as, Greta could have easily helped explain it away as a bad dream. And she does take active steps to get her this, top of the line lock on the door. And I mean, she doesn't do anything to stop their mother from going after anyone else, which she's presumably doing off screen. But I didn't feel like it was just to shut down a potential problem. It felt like that, it felt like she had gone through life because, she's working for their mother, that she'd really gone through life ruthlessly avoiding ever having to think about that.
Yes.
And just, focusing on making herself safe and covering contingencies and things like that, and, eliminating potential threats and feeling in control. But that when she's forced to remember what was, done to her and to their other sister, she will step in, even if it's something that, doesn't protect anyone else.
Segue to a less fraught topic. Fraught topic. Here's a question. What do you make of the wise old man in her building?
One of the things I enjoy about him is that despite the fact that he's, the wise old man in her building, he's still totally willing to help them film a scam video.
Oh yeah, I mean he's on a fixed income,
Right.
Every little bit helps.
Right. And I enjoy that part. I mean, I also just enjoy that the scam is, oh, these poor boomers, they still are not able to, understand smartphones and the technology. Yes. They're lonely and alone. Please donate to charity to help them. And, he's perfectly net savvy.
Yes, he's fine.
He's fine. He's fine. And he's willing to, be filmed as like a sad, pathetic elder. But he doesn't actually want to watch the video because, that would be kind of embarrassing.
Yeah. I like him.
I like him. I mean, I think honestly that part of his narrative role is to show Lore slowly. It's showing Lore developing positive emotional connections, which helps lay the groundwork for her to have her romance with Magyar, and have it feel like she's coming to it from a less vulnerable place, even though this is technically her supervisor.
Yeah, we're not getting rid of
all the power.
There's a bunch of different power dynamic differences between them, honestly, and the fact that, as Magyar continuously points out, that Laura is technically a billionaire is probably a more significant one ultimately.
Yes, yes, and but, their relationship doesn't start to develop until it becomes less of a one-way power dynamic.
Yeah, until some truths are in fact shared.
Right.
But it's like, but I mean, also, Magyar thinks she's a safety inspector or like a government inspector for most of it, and so that she's not actually an employee.
Right. So, but I think that the Tom, the nice old guy, and the two, and the lesbian couple who forgives her for what she's who sort of forgives
wholesome.
her. They're so wholesome. Except, I mean, first of all, again, they also are involved in the black market, and it's really clear that that part of why they're willing to let her back into their life after she was complicit in in drugging them and then filming them. Is that, first of all, because they know Spanner, and they understand, and like there's this whole conversation where they keep trying to get Lore to say, yes, I was a victim, and it's partly, I think, because they actually want it, it's so obvious that she is a victim, and it's partly that they want to have an excuse for being able to.
They want to have an excuse to forgive her,
to forgive her,
or forgive her enough,
right? To forgive her enough, but also, I think they're kind of aware of the fact that they let this, Spanner take in this vulnerable young woman, and nobody did anything, including them.
Yeah, no. 100%.
There's a lot of, you're very different from Spanner's usual type. Oh wow, you're sticking around a lot longer than Spanner's usual type.
But nobody was like, do you not have any place else to go?
Yeah, do you have any place?
Run? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a thing. Yeah, no, I think you're right there. So I've a couple of complaints.
All right, let's go to the grumpy zone.
Minor complaints, yeah, grumpy zone. Grumpy. Oh, I remember what I was going to say before we go to the grumpy zone.
Oh, okay.
I think that part of this is that there is this sort of feeling in this book which reminds me of, for example, Trouble and Her Friends, or even The Dyke and the Dybbuk, where it's like, okay, this is a society that's not very homophobic. Even the old guy is like, do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend?
Mm-hmm.
But there's still this understanding that to be queer is to be sort of in the demimonde.
Yes, I mean, The Dyke and the Dybbuk, I guess the Dybbuk is queer and in a society that doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, but I mean, specifically though, there's this feel. I think that like 90s queer literature in general, there is this assumption that if you're queer, you're going to be slightly outside straight society, and straight in both senses of the word,
Right. Well, because
even if
in
we're
the
imagining
90s,
a non-homophobic world.
Right, because in the 90s that was true, and so to some degree, if
exactly.
you want to be telling a story that feels real to queer people in the 90s, it helps to have one that has that resonance, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem. It's just like, I think that's part of where that comes from. It's like that a lot of the queer women in this book are willing to forgive a lot. And I'm sure that, in queer societies, as we know from what history we do have, there was a lot of people being like, oh, that guy's a pedophile. Oh, that guy is a weird racist, or fetishist or chaser. It's just part of the whole deal. We're all doing our best and getting along. And
Yeah, but straight society does this too. This is a human universal, is the willingness to look the other way when people exploit the vulnerable.
yeah, I know. It's just like I think part of the whole, oh, you can't even think about teenagers having sex thing now that or wanting to have sex thing that we're talking about now is as an attempt to make queerness different
Yeah, that I think is very true.
at the moment. Grumpy zone for real. But anyway, so yeah, my complaints boil down to the fact that this author is such a good writer, and is so poetic that the 17/22-year-old woman, rich girl who didn't really go to school, talks like a poet even when she's drunk or high, which is occasionally distracting or for example, Tack speaks in complete poetic sentences that are full of meaning when he's out of his mind with grief and despair when he's talking. That, I think that's the sort of thing that an author gets over time. I certainly didn't. In Spear, people talked like human beings. In here, Laura,
And in So Lucky, people talk like human beings.
Exactly. This is a bit of an issue here. It's a bit over-egged and plummy in parts, and Laura also has a habit of spelling out what the metaphors mean.
Yes.
With her mom's contact lenses, which is it's a bit of a touch. And it's like I don't think it's bad that there are that the themes reference like physical realities in the thing. I think, oh, you've taken away rich grandma, you've literally taken away our parts of our identity. You've leached the color out of us because being rich is kind of being soulless, and you just want to demonstrate that. Okay, maybe a little on the nose, but fine. But you don't have to tell us what it means in addition to doing it.
Right.
And Laura occasionally sort of edges too close to that IMO. But really, and the other thing is that the one sort of, and this is again the 90s thing, it's like, oh, maybe we'll invest in infrastructure, is the idea that, the idea that Laura thinks the cops might do anything about her family, sure, she's sheltered. But the fact that Magyar thinks the cops might do something about her family, are you kidding me? Yeah.
Right. And the idea, I guess the only, the thing that would have actually worked is to publicize this. If they really want to rescue this kid, help rescue this kidnapped boy, which I'm not sure they actually. Media, not to the police. Right, it would be to go to the media especially because that's the one thing that Greta actually does fear.
Yes.
But they own their own island that they've bought off all the press to promise never to say where it is.
Yeah, they might even have trouble getting the press to talk about this, honestly, depending on how there's always deals still are.
Well, there's always the tabloids and
Yeah, some enterprising organ would put it out, I'm sure.
Right, or just tweeting it.
But and sure, we're not going to put ID chips under our skins. We're going to carry around everything on our phones, but we're still gonna let the government track us wherever we go. We're just not going to actually put it into our bodies. But that's fine.
Yeah,
I don't mind that.
That's just your classic cyberpunk touch. I wouldn't call this straight up cyberpunk. I feel like it's more cyberpunk adjacent.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought it would be more cyberpunk when I heard Spanner's name, because that's such a cyberpunk name. But Spanner's name is, in fact, the most cyberpunk thing about this entire
Well, the thing is, Spanner herself is leading this cyberpunk life where, she's hacking other people's smartphones. They're called slates, but they're smartphones.
But it's also like, it's not really that cyberpunky. It's more what the actual cyberpunk future is, which
right.
is,
But like for 1995, so like Spanner is leading a cyberpunk life. It's just that Lore isn't, and because this is Lore's story, we don't, it's not a cyberpunk book. It's cyberpunk adjacent with, where it's got, it's near future and dystopian.
Yeah.
But less, despite the occasional scenes where it's just people shouting chemical names at each other and watching gauges, or, Lore musing on proprietary feed for, genetically engineered bacteria, it's not actually that concerned with the effect of technology on people.
Yeah, no, it's more... I would say it's more extrapolating the way the technology is used from the way that people are, which is why it's far more accurate than a lot of
yes.
things that do it from the other side are.
Yes, and I mean, including, like, why do rich people always still put their smartphones in their jacket pockets that they sling over, the back of their seat at the restaurant?
Yeah, because it's not a, well, we all know.
Right. But, like, that's smart. It's the sort of thing that's clearly well extrapolated.
Indeed. Yeah. And I appreciate both that Lore is actually, first of all, this book, and another thing that this book is not cyberpunk about is that it absolutely refuses to romanticize crime or
yes.
Or the life of a pirate, basically.
Right. I mean, the happy ending here is that, yes, Laura's going to take her inheritance, but she's still planning, it seems like, on leading she's not planning on going back to the billionaire life, and she's also not planning to go back to her life of crime.
Yeah. I mean, it really leans into how sordid it all is at the end of the day, which I appreciate. And the other thing that I liked about it is that among Laura's character traits is also that she's a very horny person. She's very sex motivated, and that's not one of the bad things about her.
Right.
It just is.
Right. Like, and it's useful because you get to see her having lots of happy sex before she falls in with Spanner. So that, so that it's clear that her horniness is not, the result of what Spanner put her through.
Yes.
And if anything, that seems to have dampened her horniness a little bit.
Yes. Jesus Christ. The whole, like, total limb dislocation sex thing was... I hope to God that she invented that out of whole cloth. Anyway, I've never heard of that before, and hopefully we'll never again. For the love of God, if I'm wrong about that, keep it to yourself. I think that brings me, at least, to the end of what I have to say. Do you have any other things to touch on?
No, I think we've covered everything. It's a good book, and I recommend it if you can get past the difficult parts.
Absolutely. So yeah, the Utena movie. Oh wait a minute, I'm not going to say that out loud. Or no, I should at this point. Yeah, for our 50th episode, we are going back to Utena as we threatened to do.
We threatened to do that if we made it all the way to 50 episodes, we would do the Utena movie, and
we have somehow, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And then after that, because we're both, you just finished it, and I'm like a good chunk of the way through it, we're going to do Note of the Ninth.
Of course, though, like it will have been out for months by the time this podcast actually airs, but
oh, I'm sure that Taz will survive without the Wizards versus Lesbians bump.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. And with any luck, we might even record that one before we record the Utena movie episode.
We might, yeah.
But it'll come out in that order regardless.
Yes.
So until then.
Till then.
Enjoy lesbian fiction, everybody. I'm apparently trying to come up with a new catchphrase on the fly, but do that and
read more lesbian speculative fiction, including the old stuff. 90s. Yes, including the stuff from the 90s.
Bye.
Bye.